Right, I think we can start. Hello, everyone, wherever you're tuning in, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for being with us here today. Also, thank you, Jihany, as usual, João, Edwin, and Etienne. Also, all of them reaching us from different sides of the world. Jihany will certainly introduce our guests for today. Today, we are having a conversation about another topic that we've been speaking a lot about, which is water management. And this time, we brought João, Edwin, and Etienne to tell us how their wine regions are responding to water issues. And in this case, we're talking about Alentejo in the south of Portugal, New Zealand as a whole, and South Africa that has faced in the past serious water restrictions. Jihany will be leading this conversation. Jihany is responsible for one of the most important projects that we are producing this year, which is a report on water management, on everything water. And for that reason, we've been conducting a series of climate talks on this matter and approaching it from different angles to bring as much information as we can from different specialists, different wine producers, different regions, and bring it all together in a summary to deliver to the whole of the wine world. And also, let me introduce to you the Porto Protocol Foundation in case you are tuning in for the first time. We are the Wines Industry Climate Action Network. We were founded by Taylor Sports, and today we count with a community of more than 250 companies spread across the whole wine value chain and across the wine world. So we have more companies spread in more than 21 countries, very different profiles, very small companies, companies that produce something like 400 cases, some of the biggest wine companies in the world, all united to collaboratively build a collective response to tackle climate change. So consider this an invitation for you to join us, whatever you are, whatever you do across the wine value chain. And without further ado, Jihany, the stage is yours. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Marta, for that introduction. So I'm just about to share my screen. Can I get a confirmation or a thumbs up from somebody on the other side that you can view it? Yes. Okay, great. So bem-vindos. Welcome everybody to today's climate talk from the Water Footprint series, as Marta described. We are entitled today, Water and Wine Regional Strategies for a Thirsty Future. So around the world, irregular rainfall patterns and water scarcity is reshaping the way wine is grown. From the dry plains of Alentejo to the variable climates of New Zealand and the semi-arid vineyards of South Africa, our industry is learning to do more with less and to collaborate more than ever before. So today, we'll explore how regional frameworks, collective actions, and technology are guiding us towards a more resilient, water-smart future. I am Jihany Brecci, your host for today's Climate Talk, owner and operator of STELLA Pietro Vineyards located in the Mantiqueira mountain range of southeastern Brazil. And I'm honored to welcome, on behalf of the Porto Protocol, our distinguished guests. So we have General Manager of Sustainability at New Zealand Wine Growers, Edwin Massey, Sustainability Coordinator at Vinhos do Alentejo, João Barroso, and Viticulturalist Consultant at Vinpro South Africa, Etienne Terblanche. So a round of applause here for this beautiful panel we put together. And I'll let you guys each introduce yourself. I'm just going to pause the slide sharing for a moment. And also let our audience know if you have any questions, comments, reactions to anything that's being discussed during the panel today, please feel free to pop them into the webinar chat or in the Q&A. Our panelists will try to answer them on the go. And if not answered during the talk, we'll try to address them at the end of the talk. Okay, so let's get started with Edwin. Edwin, could you please tell our audience here today how your work connects to sustainable water use in the wine industry and what major water-related challenges define your region today? By doing so, if you could pop in an introduction of yourself and a little blurb on the organization which you represent.
Sure. I'm Ed Massey. I'm the General Manager of Sustainability at New Zealand Wine Growers. New Zealand Wine Growers is the industry organisation that represents all commercial grape growers and winemakers in New Zealand. So we have around 700 winery members and just over 600 grower members. Our work is funded by commodity levies on the sale of grapes and wine. and sustainability is a core component of our work. Our water is a really fundamental part of our environment strategy. And we track progress on water efficiency and our impact on water quality, consistent with our industry goal to be a world leader in efficient water use and the protection of water quality. We do this through Sustainable Wine Growing New Zealand, which is celebrating its 30th year as the first wine industry sustainability certification program that was established in 1995. A key challenge for us right now is moving from that sole focus on efficiency to really trying to mitigate the impact of viticultural production on water quality in New Zealand, as that is a key pressing issue right across the country. And I think it's a real challenge and an exciting opportunity for our industry to drive towards the quality angle of our water goal.
Thank you, Edwin. Now on to João. How does your work at Vinhos do Alentejo connect to sustainable water use in our industry, and how would you frame the major water-related challenges in Alentejo to our audience today?
Well, thank you very much for the question. Thank you very much for the invitation of the protocol. Very much like Edwin, in fact, we're late bloomers by comparison to New Zealand. We're now going into our 11th year of program, so we've learned a lot from what our colleagues down under have been doing in the past couple of years. And indeed, au contraire of, we're not just in the antipodes of New Zealand geographically, but also in terms of the issues, for instance, of water. Because indeed, whereas in New Zealand, it rains quite well. In Alentejo, it's progressively raining lesser and lesser. So I could say that maybe in the last 2 decades, we have lost around 200 millimeters of rain, or 300 millimeters of rain. So it's indeed a very scarce resort. So, and the way we've been trying to organize the whole water management, it started first with the sheer awareness that needed to be done, because unfortunately Portugal has been historically a country where this kind of the management of the natural resources have been a bit left to the user, not to the regulator, to impose certain types of methods and metrics to raise awareness with the viticulturists on how to use the resource water. And so indeed, when we come into the picture, we come with all of these metrics and all of these suggestions of techniques and technologies, which are nothing more than a simple flow meter, for instance, which is really a very effective way to raise awareness and then build on from there. So indeed, when we started 10 years ago, a bit more, we had already some companies that already had this awareness and were very, very conscious of the issues of water use. But there was a big road to be traveled by the whole region. And obviously we then used a couple of companies to assist us as lighthouses at the time, to serve as example on how to build on this patrimony that was already been identified. But indeed, today we work, and again, probably very much as at the image of New Zealand or any other serious and decent sustainability program around the world. It's very much on the benchmark. It's very much on the knowledge sharing strategies, on creating knowledge sharing networks where everybody can pitch in and serve as an inspiration, serve as an example to others with regards to the issues of water. Now, that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it, which is also, I think, that speaks to us all here, is dimensions and capacities. And again, we have companies in Alentejo, very different. So we have, companies that for the Portuguese reality are considered very big. So companies that produce 15, 17 million bottles. But then we have companies that produce 100,000 bottles, or sometimes even less. And so indeed, capacities are different, budgets are different, human resources are different. And so indeed, you need to have strategies that are wise enough to be able to cater for every single reality and to be inclusive in a way that everybody, can feel identified with what we propose, identified with what they see, inspired by what they see, and feel that they have the capacity to give the extra mile with regards to the challenges that not only viticulture poses, but we in the sustainability program also identify and present to the producers.
Perfect. Thank you so much, João. And Etienne, please, how does your role at Vinpro address sustainable water use in the South African wine industry? And if you could draw a very brief portrait of the major water challenge that your region is facing today.
Thanks, Jihany. It's lovely to be here. As you might know, and as you introduced, South Africa is a semi-arid growing region. So we are a water scarce country. To give you an idea, some of the wine regions receive up to 200 millimeters of rain a year, and then it goes up to 1,000. So I think water scarcity per se is kind of front of mind in many of the aspects of wine growing. To come to Vinpro, where I spent my days, Vinpro is also a wine grower producer body, but focuses on technical matters. We also have in South Africa Wine as similar to Edwin's position, and we follow this sustainability certification through a system called the Integrated Production of Wine, which I think runs at a similar stage. I think started in 1998. But my role specifically is I head up a group of extension officers and consultants. We are not funded by a levy, so we're self-funded. We fund ourselves through services to producers. And we've got about 12 regional consultants giving on-farm advice to growers, how to manage water, among other things, because as you'll hear later, the use of water and profitability is very closely aligned in our situation, both regarding to yield and quality. So it's a really important matter. And yeah, I think that's me for a start.
Thank you, and welcome all three of you. I'll start with a broader question that will help, our audience kind of dive into the context in which each one of you are inserted. And this is one of water as a shared resource. So as water has become, a shared concern across ecosystems and communities, how do your regions manage water as a collective resource, balancing the needs for water in the agricultural context, in the urban context, and for ecological needs at large as well? So if you could draw a small portrait of that, it would help our audience maybe dive into a bit more of the region that you're each speaking from.
I can jump in to start, and I can probably address the question in the chat as well about the Whanganui River there. So in New Zealand, the government sets national law across all our regions, and then also a national direction for how water is used. And that national direction is then implemented at a regional level by local government authorities. So, for example, where I am in Marlborough, there will be slightly different rules and regulations to, for example, in Hawke's Bay, which is another of our large wine regions. And in each area, there is a community process to then balance, I guess, how water is used between agricultural use, for example, customary use, for example, that's for our Indigenous population, for our tangata whenua, and also for human health needs. And that's where specific rules can come in different regions. And so, for example, in the North Island, in a river that flows out to the Tasman Sea on the west coast, the Whanganui River has been granted personhood, and essentially, in that respect, it must be the rights and mana or personality and being of the river must be respected in lawmaking. And I think that doesn't apply in all cases, but I think in that case, it has been quite successful to protect that river and balance all the needs of the users in that area. So, I mean, what it is while we have a national and regional framework, there is a range of ways that water can be balanced depending on the input of the people in those regions.
Thank you, Edwin, and thank you, Linda, for the great question on personhood and the river. João, would you like to take a stab?
Yeah, so our reality is a bit different. So, for instance, for you to see, but I think these are not numbers that are kind of well known across the world. Overall, developing countries use 90% of water, potable water for agricultural purposes. Portugal not being a developing country, or at least we like to believe that we're not there anymore. Just a recent study from a very reputable third-party foundation came with a number that 70% of the water, the potable water in Portugal, was used for agriculture. So indeed, there's a bit of a clearly unbalance on the on the priorities of the use of water. So, but then having said that, when you look into the region of Alentejo, where again less population, less resources, more impoverished economy, we do have the biggest artificial lake in Europe that was created a couple of years ago. It's called Alqueva, and the Alqueva Dam was created exactly to cater for the needs of water. But what we've been witnessing so far is that indeed it's been catering for the needs of some agriculture sectors, but funnily enough, some of which are quite new to the region. Say, for instance, the almond groves were starting to be planted all across Alentejo, and in fact, changing the landscape of the region also, which is something that from an ecosystem perspective may not be the wisest. But so indeed, we are witnessing that there's a lot of focus. And in fact, these industries in itself are positioning very well to secure the water resource. So almonds in one case, and olive super intensive olive grove production also is the case. And the wine industry in that regard is lagging a little bit behind, even because I often hear producers which are not even 25 kilometers away from Alqueva saying they still do not have. So the government and the local and the regional government has not yet provided the infrastructure for the water to get there. So indeed, that is a massive problem. So what do we do? Again, in the case of Edwin, I'm not sure about the case of South Africa and Etienne, but I believe that in the case of New Zealand, the New Zealand wine sustainability system is government owned. I believe it's not a private thing. But you, Edwin, you can correct me if I'm saying a big
it's industry led. Sustainable Wine Growing New Zealand is led by the industry for the industry.
There you go. So that's exactly. Thank you very much. That's exactly what I was trying to get, because what we also see in the sustainability industry is often it works in the beyond compliance strategy. So often sustainability doesn't wait for regulators and governments. It's the private sector or the academic sector that often pushes this agenda of beyond compliance. So indeed, in the case of Alentejo, based on the scenario that I just gave you of mismanagement of water and of a little bit of an unorganized distribution of the resource in the industry and obviously with the populations, we the Wines of Alentejo Sustainability Program takes the lead with the producers in order to come up with what we've talked and what we will still be talking throughout the session on methods and methodologies and strategies to help use the resources as most efficient and smartly as possible, considering all of these contingencies that we face with.
Thank you, João. Etienne.
Yes, I mean, nothing gets as real as day zero, as we experienced a couple of years ago, in terms of actually, almost feeling like you're going back in time and going to a collection point somewhere in your town or village to go and collect some water to do the basic your basic household functions. So yes, Cape Town and the Western Cape is really uh, was drought stricken between actually 2015 and 2018. And yeah, I think we kind of grinded to a halt, and it forced everyone to come together and say, listen, yeah, we've got a massive problem. We've got what we call in the Western Cape semigration, where there's a massive influx from people across South Africa coming to see these beautiful mountains and views behind us, and coming to live in the Western Cape region, mostly because of governments and great climate. But so we've got this massive urban influx. We have also a duty to address previous wrongs in terms of access to water for especially black and upcoming farmers, because we've already reached our limit, and then we basically didn't have any water in the taps. And for me, from a viticultural perspective, we had to consult producers and tell them on certain vineyards, you probably need to close the tap on that one. And for a vineyard that's receiving less than 150 millimeters of rainfall a year, that basically means the end of the life of the vineyard. So for us, it was kind of a forced pressure cooker, but I think some really good strategies came out of that, and we're really better off for it. And understanding also just the wine industry's position, to João's point, compared to some of the agronomic crops in our region. Luckily for the wine, we are a bit lower on the juice. So yeah, it was a real shock to the system, but we came together, national, local government. I don't know if you maybe I can introduce that the National Water Act in South Africa constitutes that there's no private ownership of water, groundwater, runoff water. This is all state-owned, and for every water usage, especially in agricultural, you need to receive a permit to use your water. So it's highly regulated.
Thank you, Etienne. Linda asks here in the chat, are the water shortages encouraging converting to dry farming, or are you all seeing an increase in freshwater irrigation and previously dry farm parcels now being irrigated? Maybe this could be addressed to the panel as a whole, but if you want to take a stab at it, Etienne, feel free.
Definitely, actually seeing a bit less dry farming, because the drought actually impacted the dry farmed vineyards the most. Ironically, there's always a concept of having some vineyards having more resilience than others, maybe due to dry farming. But from a viticulture perspective, the weight actually fell over into the section. It's the technical field of site suitability, and really choosing those sites that are more moderate. The soils have larger buffer capacity, maybe with supplementary irrigation, just to sustain the yields. But yeah, I think the weight actually went into understanding vineyard planning, understanding vineyard design to optimize water runoff, to ensure that everything is captured in the site, rather than encouraging dry farming, because our rainfall is so sporadic, that dry farming often leads to erratic yields and erratic quality, and really hampers profitability and sustainability, economic sustainability of the industry.
And I'll take this opportunity here to inform our audience that we will be having another climate talk later on this month with Linda Johnson-Bell here present today in the chat, in the audience as well, on dry farming. So stay put on the social media platforms to learn more about that. On that note, Edwin and João, maybe we can bounce off the day zero, right? That Etienne touched on, you know, these moments of crisis, like Cape Town's day zero event, or Alentejo's prolonged drought that João, you've touched on briefly here on your introduction. They often trigger change. And as a collective, your whole region, would you be able to pick out perhaps some lessons that your regions drew from these experiences, and how it changed some longer term adaptations rather than just a reaction to that moment of crisis?
Well, I can start with that. Funnily enough, and paradoxically enough, maybe to the case of Etienne, so I don't know how we go in South Africa with the heat waves, but here in Southern Europe, it's becoming, come on, today's the 13th of October. I know we're Northern Hemisphere and you're both Southern Hemisphere, but it's 30 degrees. It was 30 degrees in Lisbon today, and all over the country, temperatures are way higher than they should be for, middle of October. And so indeed, when we get to the heat waves of the period of summer, this year alone, we had two massive heat waves, one of which took almost 10 days of heat wave of, temperatures in the Alentejo region of around 45 degrees during the day and 26, 28 at night, which are tropical nights, which is also not cool for this Mediterranean environment. So, but this to say that, funnily enough, and this goes back to what Jihany was asking, and also the question that was on the chat, what we've been witnessing. Well, first of all, it is needed to say that Alentejo, you have again, it's a very diverse ecosystem of producers. So we have, as I mentioned before, 50 million to 100,000. And obviously, it's a region, whereas you all know also, probably better than I, that the vineyard is by default a dry farm plant. It only starts to be irrigated when you're starting to look at volumes. If you don't look at big volumes, maybe your plant, because it's resilient by nature, will be able to give yields of up to, I don't know, 3, 4, 5, 6 tons. So what we see in Alentejo is indeed producers that are very much into the volumes, irrigation with the water they have, and with the water that sometimes they actually don't have. But what we also be witnessing is, and bear in mind, in my region, we can say we have around 200 and plus cellars, around 1,800 vintners for an area of 23,000 hectares of planted vineyard. So again, we're very inexpressive worldwide. We represent 0.3% of the vineyard area of the world, okay? For Portugal, it's a big area, but Portugal is a small country. So it's a bit, again, paradoxical. But this to say that in that scenario, 20% of the producers represent 80% of the yield. And then the remaining 80% of the producers is the left face, like the Pareto principle, fair and square. And so indeed, for the vast majority, which are pretty much small and medium-sized companies, what we've seen with, and particularly I can speak best of the sustainability program certified members, is that the smaller you are, or the middle-sizer you are, the more you seem to be tending to go into dry farming again. They will irrigate in the first up to 3 years of the installation of the vineyard, but less and less and less in order to then go into dry farming, because most of these agricultures really believe that the future will be a dry farming future due to water scarcity, because what probably the two scenarios of the UNFCCC that will come into play. So the RCP 8.6, 8.5 and 6.5 both give to Alentejo, irrigation rain averages of almost nothing for 2050 to 2070, and average temperatures of above 5 degrees more than we see today. So indeed, in fact, there's almost a risk that you can't even produce grapes for wine in these regions in 25, 30 years. That is what the algorithms and the predictions say. And so indeed, in this very doom and gloom scenario, there's still obviously hope. And so indeed, it has to be regarded with these issues of working with the scarcity that we predict that will exist. And so indeed, dry farming seems to be one of the techniques most most interesting for producers. And I would just like to finish with one sentence I also once heard from a vintner in Portugal, funnily enough, from the north, not from the south. And she was saying that water was she said to me that water is to the vineyard what heroin is to addict. And so indeed, if you just do it, the plant will just get addicted and you will never be able to, cold turkey the plant of it. And so it's a very interesting, in my opinion, metaphor for this whole issue of water in these, bear in mind again, in these very water scarce areas of the globe where we still make wine.
Thank you, João. Maybe shifting a little bit perspectives and still on the topic of governance and policy frameworks, Edwin, the New Zealand's freshwater farm plans, how would you say that this framework could or is influencing growers' daily practice and accountability on the ground in a region perhaps where the scarcity isn't such a present question as it may be in Alentejo or in South Africa?
No, it's a good question. So water quality in New Zealand has certainly been adversely impacted by increasing competition and increasing primary sector activity over the last 30 years. I think there's and that's right across all farming systems, so from dairy to horticulture, the whole range. It's become quite a political issue in New Zealand in the last decade. And I think what the Freshwater Farm Plan proposed regulations have really highlighted is that all industries can do something to mitigate the impact that their land use has on fresh water. In our industry, we are very low users of nitrogenous fertilizer, only around 8 kilograms per hectare per annum. And nitrates has been a key issue in New Zealand's freshwater ecosystem management in recent decades. And so what freshwater farm plans require will be for those vineyards or over a 50 hectare threshold will be regulated to require a plan which sets out how they mitigate the risk posed to freshwater from their operations. So in vineyards, for example, it could be nitrogen application using sheep to graze in winter, potentially cultivation is a risk, and also replanting or redevelopment. And so we think that the regulations are an opportunity to help drive our industry towards our industry goal, which is to be that world leader in the protection of water quality. We have provided our members with some real high quality guidance on how to manage risk by producing industry-wide guidelines, and also encouraging our members to do a walk in the rain survey to understand that when rain falls on their vineyard, especially if it's heavy, how do those flows leave the vineyard and go into surrounding waterways? And how do you slow down that flow? And I think that message is getting through. We will be looking to integrate or make decisions on how to integrate freshwater farm planning into sustainable wine growing New Zealand, because when you think about that threshold, we have around 200 vineyards in New Zealand that are over 50 hectares and around 1,750 vineyards overall. So there's the freshwater farm plan regulations will only apply to our largest landholders. But that question of how do we integrate the concepts of farm planning into sustainable wine growing New Zealand are very real, and we're having those discussions at the moment. And so I think to get ahead of the government regulations, I think is really important, because we need to demonstrate that our industry is really focused on achieving our goal. That's important not just for our social license to operate, but also to our markets.
Thank you, Edwin. And I'll allow myself to go just a little bit further onto this theme and perhaps touch a bit on technologies and tools. In a previous conversation we've had, you've touched on a tool that the New Zealand wine is working on that could help farmers. Would you be able to elaborate a little bit on what the tool is about and what its function is?
Sure. So we partnered with our central government through the Essential Freshwater Fund to develop a pilot tool that would enable our members to complete a freshwater farm plan consistent with the regulations online. And so what that involved was building a system that enabled members to map their farm and then identify any waterways, either permanent waterways or ephemeral, and then also map potential risk elements. So, for example, where are the road crossings? Where are the spray sheds? Where do sheep graze? And then once those risks have been identified, there's a drop-down menu of how to mitigate those risks. So, for example, to mitigate the risk of stock getting into waterways, you could fence the waterway, you could plant flax or native grasses along the edge to prevent the nitrates from the animals getting into the waterways. And then it's at the end, once you've developed that, it spits out an action plan, and the action plan would say, over 5 years, you will plan to fence this waterway 800 meters a year. So it's not saying you've got to do it all at once. It's saying that you will do it over a period of time. And through the freshwater farm planning regulations, it is that action plan which gets audited. And so by creating that tool, there is the potential for members to use it to meet their regulatory requirements without, for example, hiring a farm consultant to do it for them.
Thank you, Edwin. This is great. We're moving on to, a bit more of the technical applications of what, your associations or your nonprofits are tackling. On that note, Etienne, there's a few things that you guys are also doing on the ground, including a newsletter, is my understanding, to growers. There's also the Gen Z project that you've touched on also in a previous conversation. I don't know if you think it's applicable to address here, but I'll let you elaborate for our audience. What are some of the works that VinPro is carrying out on the ground in South Africa to help producers on this task?
Yeah, so thanks, Jenny. For us, we after our day zero, I think the first point of action for VinPro per se was how to future-proof our vineyards, and we realized that like many regions in the world, we have a really diverse, unique microclimates, topography, and regional realities are very different. So we launched a project called Gen Z, which we're going to rename soon. But the idea was to look at vineyards for the future. At that time already, we've been doing a lot of work on deficit irrigation, on cover crops, generating new rootstocks, drought tolerant and drought resistant rootstocks. So we just felt that farmer application and uptake hasn't quite been there. So we created these on-farm demonstration plots. We've got about 50 of them spread across the Western Cape, where we demonstrate the different types of cover crops, also demoing different irrigation regimes, specifically, using the farmer's control, and then a high qualitative control, and some even further higher deficits to show the implication on yield and quality. And that's been really well received. I think producers as you all know, seeing is believing. They want to understand how it impacts them in their region, and it's been extremely valuable to actually show the impact of drought tolerant varieties. Many of them even from the Iberian Peninsula. João, Portuguese varieties are amazing in terms of drought tolerance and heat tolerance. So yeah, and we've also partnered with South Africa Wine is our research and development arm, and over the past, I think it's about 6 years, we've developed this tool called TerraClim, where producers can access very high resolution climate data, because what we saw is these dramatic landscapes behind us, and the impact of the ocean causes massive climate variation over short distances. And we, as I mentioned earlier, our sustainability view is to plant vineyards where they need to be. So using this high quality, high resolution climate data, and South Africa isn't bound like many of the New World. We aren't bound by strict appellation in terms of production regulation rules. We can move to higher altitudes, more moderate conditions, to produce quality wines with a lower impact on the environment.
Beautiful. So we've seen here with Edwin, a tool that can help you develop a more sustainable farm plan. And then Etienne is discussing, outsourcing the test plots, right? The experimental vineyards to a third party, so that we can more easily convince a wider audience to adopt new practices that would be more sustainable in terms of water use. And then again, open source, saying, data sharing. So these are three beautiful initiatives here. And to complement that, João, you guys also have an award-winning program with the whole accreditation status, certifying the wineries and the vineyards in Alentejo, and there's a strong focus on water. So maybe you can dive a bit more deeply into that structure for the audience here today.
Sure. Well, one thing that's also important is in our case, so I'm an employee of the Regional Wine Growing Commission, so the appellation of Alentejo. But the program I manage is free of charge and voluntary. So no producer in Alentejo, whereas if they want to make a DOC Alentejo, they have to, either they like it or not, knock on our door and comply with all the rules with regards to sustainability. Not the case. They come to us because they're so nice and and friendly, and like to learn or like to share with regards to the aspects of sustainability. So this to say that everything we do, and thankfully is extremely successful, but everything we do is based on wishful thinking. It's based on, let's see if the producers are willing to, embark in yet again another crazy strategy or another crazy idea. So then, having said that, pretty much most of the things that, obviously the aspect more in detail that Edwin was mentioning of that new assisting program that they have, we don't have something with that level of complexity, but many of the measures that Edwin then described in the program, as well as some of the aspects that Etienne mentioned, is all the stuff that we've been promoting here for a couple of years now. So I think that the words or the expression that would encapsulate most of the things that we've been discussing, or that my two panelist colleagues were referring, would be nature-based solutions. So everything that's related with slash as ecosystem services. These are the two, to my opinion, the two main expressions slash themes that encapsulate most of these strategies. And so then this will end up in another buzzword that is quite sexy these days, for good or bad, which is regenerative agriculture, which again is something that in the case of Alentejo, particularly due to issues related with climate change and heat and drought and water scarcity and heat waves, are strategies that we are not forcing, because again, we cannot force anything, but we are strongly aligned with in terms of what we believe to be a successful strategy for the whole region in general and for producers in particular. So what we do in that regard is we observe, well, we embed in our own requirements many of these aspects of regen, or let's call it of just nature-based solutions. So the cover cropping that we're talking about, functional hedgerows, biodiverse plots, buffer zones, recovery of water lines, installation of endemic species. So all of these use of grazing, holistic grazing. So all of these aspects, bat use. So everything that you can think of under the sun that's related with using nature as an ally rather than as an opponent. We've been promoting them very actively for the last couple of years. And indeed, what we now have, which is the most interesting part, is producers in the position to be able to say, and yes, just answering this question of Linda, if rainwater harvesting practice seriously in Alentejo, it is because it's where we get the water from. So we really have to create all the strategies, be those through, the key line. Now there's something that we see a lot of producers starting to plant the vineyard in key line, so in a way that will allow for the water to drop and be, as actually Edwin's idea or what they do of the water walk. I think it's a brilliant way of raising awareness for where the water in fact goes and how should we look at the water in order to exactly allow it to then be collected and recovered for future purpose. So on one hand, that. And indeed, what we now have is producers that are in the condition that after 5-6 years of implementing this kind of strategies and of having gone through water scarcity through 2 or 3 years of severe drought and then consecutive years of heat waves with no yield loss, quite the opposite. Whereas, say for instance, I can give you a practical example. This year in Alentejo, on average, was reported a yield loss of in between 35 to 50%, because the summer was, as I mentioned before, extremely hot. We had a beautiful winter, rained like it hadn't rained in a long time, but the summer was, I don't believe, I'm 47 years old, and I don't remember going through a heat wave. There was, 10 days of consecutive temperatures above 40+ degrees. So it was very intense. The plants really retracted with that. But indeed, I have producers that say, and more than saying, they say, I have the data. I can show the data on how we managed to hold on with our yield and in some points increasing yield due to what? The only answer can be due to nature-based solutions, strategies that they've been promoting, all of which have already been highlighted here, that will allow, on one hand, for the water to be preserved in the soil, to be then used in a more stressful, tense event, and at the same time, strategies that allow for the plant to protect itself in case of sunburn and that kind of phenomena that happen in these extreme weather events. So it seems to be working, and what's great about the case of Alentejo, but again, I think it's cross-sectional, thankfully, is this capacity and this generosity in producers being able to share. Because I'll just very briefly say that not long ago, I had to go around Alentejo seeing a lot of producers, and I was always asking, so how was your harvest, how did it work? And everybody's saying, all sustainably certified producers, bear in mind, we had losses of this, of that, of the other. And I was saying, this guy and that guy are saying exactly the opposite. And they would say, they're bullshitting. It can't be true. And I said, okay, so fine. So I will ask him if he wants to come into a workshop and show the data, because he does say he has the data. So I did. I challenged the guy, these two guys, and they said, yeah, sure, let's go. I'll have all the data to show and let's talk, because this proves that but again, to a certain capacity, because we're talking about middle-sized producers, not massive companies. But then again, goes back to one thing that Edwin and Etienne was saying. Particularly, I think it was Etienne. We also have big producers that have ampelographic fields, so they're testing varieties under 3 scenarios: water scarcity, comfort, and water scarcity, bit of water, and comfort. And basically, what they go is into the middle range. So a little bit of water will be enough for the yield that we want, for the varieties that we want, for the markets that we want to please.
Thank you, João. In regards to equity in the social dimensions, Etienne touched upon it briefly in one of his answers, and we all know that sustainable water management also means inclusive water governance, right? So how are small growers, local communities, or some perhaps historically underrepresented groups in your region being integrated into your water strategies? And I think just to keep the parole on you still, João, for a few minutes, you know, how is it that the region of Alentejo is also integrating its community back through these initiatives?
Well, and we touched upon that, we all know, that industries overall consume the water. It's not people, it's not populations that consume the water, it's industries. I already gave you the data, at least for Portugal, that 70% of potable water goes to agriculture. And so indeed, I think that, and again, we are a non-profit, of public interest, so we're not a very rich region either, so our resources are very limited. So I guess the most important thing is through awareness raising, and we do most of that through training. So we offer training. It used to be free of charge. Now it's cost just to cover the costs of going to the places. And indeed, I mean, for you to see, we've trained more than almost 2,000 people in 10 years. Always staff of either viticulture or cellar in the wine of Alentejo, in the Alentejo wine region. And so indeed, through these trainings where you go from a very holistic perspective of what's sustainable development, why do we talk about it, what's the problem, and then you start narrowing down up until you get to the cleaning of a barrel. And when you look at a cleaning of a barrel and you say, look, in the best case scenario, you'll spend, if you don't use vapor or infrared, ultraviolet, in the best case scenario, you'll be looking at 200 to 300 liters. In the worst case scenario, you'll be looking at 700, 800 liters for a barrel. And I can tell that in my household, we're 3 people and we spend 350 liters of water per day. And so indeed, you spend more water cleaning 1 barrel than 1 family needs to survive per day in the Lisbon area, in this case, which is where I live. So when you say this kind of data to people, it really resonates in them, and they really understand that, okay, I'm not the villain. The villain is the industry, and I work in the industry, so I'll do the best I can. I'll try to optimize as much as I can, and I'll use the tools. This is what I'm always saying to them. Please use the tools you are given. Be those, flow reducer, be those water meter, be those a sheet training on the job where you say, when you see a sign that says, please save water because it's not infinite. And so indeed, through this positive contagious, you can indeed create ways of sensitizing, and then this kind of message goes throughout the overall community. But that was the Marta, I believe, or maybe Christina I'll just make a very brief allusion to this. So we have a producer that has a very interesting, and from my understanding, at least in Europe, is probably one of the only winemakers doing this. So these guys are using municipal wastewater, cleaned municipal wastewater, to use in irrigation of the vineyard, which is something that the European Commission has been asking municipalities and governments to do for at least 5 to 6 years, and nobody's doing it. These guys are the operator is called Casa Relvas, and for maybe 5 years now, they did a massive investment. They didn't have water. They are in a region that rains very little, so indeed they managed to collect the water from this small municipality of, I believe, I don't know, 7,000 people, and the water gets cleaned to obviously the operation standards, and then is injected to a little basin they have, and then they use it for irrigation. So it's the other side of the community, right, where you get it from the community. But then again, you would argue that most of the people of this village works at Casa Relvas, so it's a kind of a closed circuit between resources, be those human, be those economic, or be those environmental, right?
Very interesting. Thank you for that specific example, João. As we're approaching the end of our talk and trying to be respectful of everybody's time, I will perhaps put forth a final question here, and maybe I'll let Edwin try to prompt at this one. Looking beyond your borders, Edwin, what opportunities do you see for cross-regional collaboration and knowledge sharing through platforms, whether it be something like, the climate talk that we're doing today via the Porto Protocol Foundation, or N number of other initiatives that would strengthen the collective water resilience, right? So beyond your region.
Oh, look, I think you've hit the nail on the head, Jihany. That learning from others around what works, what doesn't work, and how to apply it at scale, I think are really critical to improve both water efficiency in the vineyard and winery, and also the impact of viticulture on water quality. And I think João's really highlighted it. As a wine industry collectively, I think we need to challenge ourselves to be really transparent with the data, to identify where we are now, and what our objectives are and where we're going, and being really open to sharing that. Yeah, it might be a bit ugly, and water use certainly goes up and down if it rains, and or if it doesn't, and that's pretty standard. But I think we need to challenge ourselves to make that data as public as we can, and so that it helps to hold us as an industry as accountable, to show that we are making a positive difference, and that wine as a collective is perhaps the most sustainable primary sector land use that is available in many regions around the world.
Thank you. Etienne, would you like to react to that as well?
Yes, maybe just to add on that philosophical note, I think wine is such a beautiful product, celebrating the region, the people, and a product that prides itself on longevity, not only of the bottle of the wine, but the landscape and the culture. I agree. Playing open cards, benchmarking realistically. I think all these elements can really help us, just bring the correct mindset and the correct message across about wine. Just to take an example, the Cape is a highly intense biosphere with very many endangered plant species. But 80% of that land falls under private-owned land users in South Africa, and in Western Cape specifically. And approximately 70% of that has already been committed to conservation by the private owners. So it just comes to show that I think the mentality is there. It's just getting the cogs and the wheels in place to really show up, turn up, be honest, and move forward.
Thank you. There was a question here that I'll open the floor to see if we could address it now, from Thomas Gredek, that we seem to have missed. And he's asking if there are intentions to achieve water positive status in the vineyard. And I would assume this is for regions that are experiencing water scarcity. Maybe it's if you feel that could be something you're comfortable answering. If not, João?
Maybe we can elaborate on water positive. Is that related just to the product, or to the other elements in the landscape?
Yeah, I also don't really understand the concept of water positive in the context of the vineyard. So if you could elaborate more, that would help us maybe.
So we'll
Because
see
you'll
if-
never be +1 with water if you're, comes in, goes out.
I'm assuming, and this is an assumption, as I don't know if he's still with us here to elaborate, or maybe he'll send in the elaboration later, but perhaps he's talking about having reservoirs of water so that it's always ready for use. But I think whether that is a real concern for many vineyards to always have water catchment areas, and if they would be available for those, extreme contexts, and if that is actually an intention. So what, maybe presuming that was the question, if you guys
Yeah.
speak from your producers, how would you react?
I think the first thing, and João also mentioned it, is I mean the soil is the reservoir, right? It's the buffer zone, and increasing soil carbon and decreasing evapotranspiration. Those are the major tools we have um, to increase storage capacity, and then also having a conservative plant. I mean, if you have a massive plant, I think it's almost 97% of all water is lost through evapotranspiration to cool the plant down and support the growth. So conservative canopies, and a lot of carbon in the soil. That's the sustainable part. And then yeah, speaking from here, I mean, every property basically has a reservoir on the property, and yeah, planting more vineyards that your reservoir can handle. I think that's yeah, that's a business strategy and a sustainability strategy.
Very
Well,
similar in New
sorry,
Zealand.
mate. Go for it.
Or
Go for it. No, go for it. Go for it.
or just very similar in using, I've got a producer thinking of Te Whare Rā, who always tell me that their vineyard is their greatest sponge, yeah, because they've worked on the organic matter in that vineyard, and its water holding capacity gets greater and greater. But storage is absolutely critical. If you need to get a consent to build a dam and then fill that, and then you can use that water as you need it, and make your own decisions around that efficient use. And I think that's key. And water storage, you fly over Marlborough, where I'm based, and you will see a large number of privately owned dams to that support the irrigation of those the vineyards on those farming properties. Absolutely fundamental to New Zealand viticulture.
Well, I was just going to add nothing. I mean, we've been talking about this for the last hour, and they just made a pretty good, compilation of all of it. But I was going to actually just be very quick intervention. Look at it from a totally different perspective, and using a word that Etienne was a minute ago, a more philosophical one, which is something that we can also fall into, which is the efficiency paradox. And the efficiency paradox says that when you reach efficiency levels of a certain level, you then reach your savings. But instead of just keeping the savings there in the bank, you will invest more and you'll make more and you'll produce more because now you are more efficient and you are able to use more resources, which is the paradox, because what you want is to keep the resource there for a rainy day. But what life seems to show is that on average, human beings, when they reach that efficiency and those savings, instead of going, cool, let's just keep it there. No, now we can produce more because we have more. And so indeed, I think it's very important for us all as an industry also. Of course, we want to strive for this efficiency, but we also need to strive for the next guys coming and the next guys coming. And if we forget about this paradox, we won't solve the problem, just make it more maybe elegant, but we'll still have a very big problem in our hands. So yeah, I'd just like to finish with that one.
Beautiful. Thank you. Some food for thought there. Well, everyone, as we come to a close of today's session, I'd like to extend a sincere gratitude to our esteemed panelists for their time and their invaluable insights exchanged with us here today on the vital conversation of water management in the vineyard. We had a huge focus in the vineyard, but we also talked about the winery briefly. To our audience, thank you for your engagement and thoughtful questions. We invite you to explore the Porto Protocols Foundation extensive library of climate talks and resources. You can dive deeper there over a wide range of sustainability topics, and the platform itself allows you to filter the content based on water-related materials and other themes depending on your interest. Okay, we appreciate your participation and commitment to shaping a more sustainable future for viticulture. Until next time, and take care. Stay engaged.
Thank you. Until next time.